Deconverted Man here. Today I'm going to be analyzing a video called Why Atheism Doesn't Make Sense for any possible logical fallacies. If it has no logical fallacies, then I have to agree with its conclusion, and in fact we should all have to agree with its conclusion that atheism doesn't make sense. What's interesting about that conclusion is, even if it's correct, all it means is that atheism doesn't make sense. It doesn't mean that atheism is false. Just because something doesn't make sense doesn't mean it's false. So, it's a very bizarre conclusion, but still, I'm interested in seeing if this conclusion is logically valid or not.
Because of the title of this video, I know that you can prepare to hate or to fight for your lack of belief, but at least hear what I have to say before you hate. It makes sense to me why some people are agnostic, because they trust in certain parameters, and within those parameters, the existence of a God cannot be disproven, and in their view, it cannot be proven either. But atheists, a lot of them trust in the same parameters, but they conclude there is no God.
This is a very strange potential straw man. Some atheists have come to the conclusion that there is no God based on the idea that agnostics have these parameters that they've agreed on, and that these atheists are concluding that there is no God. So this becomes an actual straw man if he uses this as a launching point, if he attacks those atheists that may or may not exist based on this idea.
One reason it doesn't really make sense to me is because they're not really going in the direction that new scientific findings lead. Rather, they're going in the direction that best suits the story they've already chosen to be true.
Whoa, slow down there. You've just committed 3 logical fallacies in a row. So, appeal to personal incredulity. I don't understand X. Okay, that doesn't matter. Whether or not you understand whatever it is irrelevant. I don't understand X, therefore X isn't true. Or, I don't understand X, therefore X is true. In either case, it's an appeal to personal incredulity. Then, you have a straw man that doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. There aren't atheists that are going with the scientific method to conclude what they want to be true. This is not true. This is a straw man. And because it's also not true, it's an outright lie on top of being a straw man. Now, usually a straw man is just a constructed point that somebody makes. It's not really the argument. But it could be true. Like before, it might be true that these atheists might exist. So it's not an outright lie. But in this case, it's an outright lie because it's not true. There aren't atheists that are using science to get to conclusions that they want to get to. And in fact, you make a point later in this video that contradicts your own point that you make here. So I'm going to use your own argument against you, and I'm going to do that right now.
My burden is to let you know about God and His love for you, not to scientifically prove you wrong.
See, you said that atheists are using science to get to the wrong conclusion. Then you said, I don't have to use science to prove you wrong. Well, you could if it was true. If what you're saying was true, you would have the science to say, look, this is how science works. This is the conclusion that it's coming to. And your conclusion's way over here. That's wrong. Here's the science. That proves that you're wrong. And I've proved that you're wrong using science. But you don't do that. So basically, what you said before, that there is science that we are misusing, is something that you're not willing to support. So, because you're not willing to support it, we have to dismiss it as a conclusion.
My question to an atheist is, how can you be sure there is no God?
This is a loaded question, because it preassumes that the atheist is claiming certainty on this particular statement, which can only be made by that small group of atheists that claim that there is no God. You know what? I think I'm going to have to change that potential straw man into a definite straw man at this point. You are clearly referencing this one particular group of atheists that may or may not exist, and straw manning the rest of the atheists. So let's pop that from a parentheses to an actual number now. Alright, now that that's been done, let me address the loaded question. I can't answer it the way it's formatted. What I can say is, I don't claim certainty. I could make, and I will make, the statement, there is no Yahweh. And I've got ample evidence and arguments against Yahweh. So I'm fairly confident that those arguments and evidences can withstand critical questions and inquiry, dialogue into those evidences and into that persuasionary dialogue that I can construct against Yahweh. Other deities, other gods that exist, I have not researched at all. Period. I haven't even begun the research on those other deities. It's something that I would like to do. It's something that I plan to do. But right now, I haven't done it. So I am willing to be convinced that those other deities are true by the people or groups that propose that they are true. They have to bring forward empirical evidence, a repeatable test, and or a logically coherent argument. As far as Yahweh being real, that's something that you would have to dismantle the evidences that I have against it and deconstruct the logical argument that I have against it. If you cannot or will not do that, then I can safely conclude that Yahweh doesn't exist.
If you're like some atheist, you might claim, well, I don't know with certainty. There is just no evidence to support the existence of a god. I think there definitely is, but fair enough. I just wonder though, if that's the case, why focus so much on trying to explain a world without God?
Whoa, slow down. You're creating multiple fallacies again. Is it a straw man to say that atheists say this statement of there is insufficient evidence, therefore I don't believe in God? Yeah, many atheists do say this, but not all atheists say this. Then you have a formal fallacy, and formal fallacies don't count against your argument. There's just a representation that you don't understand how logic functions. You have the formal fallacy of failure to give an argumentation. You say that there's evidence, that you think there is evidence, but you don't tell us what it is. You just say that there's evidence, that you think that there's evidence. You could save us a lot of time by just telling us what the evidence is, and then we would have evidence for God, but you don't do that, so it's a formal fallacy, failure to give an argument, failure to produce evidence in this case. Okay, then back to the informal fallacies that do count against your presentation. You ask a meaningless question. It's a question, doesn't mean anything, and in fact, it's also beyond being a meaningless question. Why is it meaningless? Because the coherency of the question is invalid. You're asking people why they would explain a world without God. Why wouldn't they? It's a meaningless question. There is no meaning to the question. The answer is a simple answer. Because they want to explain the world. Because it's there. Because they're bored. I could insert any answer and it would be valid, making this question completely meaningless. Now, maybe you're trying to ask, but if there isn't a God, or if you don't believe in a God, or how is it that you're spending so much time trying to explain a world where there is no God? Or I'm not even really sure what this question is supposed to be, but to me, I think you're trying to say that there is a God, but we're wasting time by trying to explain the world without God in it, which means that you're pre-assuming things. I don't know. The question's meaningless. There's no way to construct what your intentionality is at this point, and I'm just guessing. But all of this is something that I can't address. But what I can say is that whether there is a God or isn't a God is irrelevant to us as humans pursuing how the world works, because that is important to learn and that is important to know, because the more we know, the better off we will be. Knowledge is power. The more you know, the less likely it is that a person or a group will take advantage of you. The more you know about the world, the better able you are to survive the hazards that that world has. So whether there's a God or not is immaterial to understanding the world.
Let me rephrase that to make it a little clearer. If your reason for not believing in God is lack of evidence, why aren't you desperately trying to find that conclusive evidence that will let you know for sure that there is no God?
This is a meaningless question, and he knows that it's a meaningless question, and he uses a couple examples of why he thinks that you could prove a negative. Let me talk about those examples.
You can't disprove a negative, it's a waste of time. You might as well try to disprove that there is no Santa Claus or spaghetti monster. But see, we can disprove those things. There is no sign of a Santa Claus. We know where that story originated. There are no magic gifts appearing every Christmas morning, and not once have we spotted flying reindeer. And the spaghetti monster, that was just a silly concept created to show that it is silly to believe in a God, but there's not really any substance there.
Okay, so this actually, bizarre as it might seem, is an argument that an apologist has attempted to construct, that, well, there's evidence against Santa Claus, and there's evidence against the flying spaghetti monster, so we know that they're not real, but yet there is no evidence against God. So you haven't disproven God. Ha 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 ha, I win. No, you still can't prove a negative. In fact, you can't prove that Santa Claus doesn't exist, nor can you prove that the flying spaghetti monster doesn't exist. And you might say, oh, well, of course you can. There's ample evidence against it. Oh, try it. Let's just say that I want to believe in Santa Claus. Let's try this as a thought experiment. Santa Claus is magic, so he's using magic to conceal the North Pole. Well, but we've never seen the flying reindeer. He's using magic to conceal the flying reindeer, but he allows NORAD to track the reindeer. In fact, many newscasts will report that NORAD's tracking the reindeer over certain regions at different times. So obviously Santa Claus is allowing NORAD to track the reindeer, even if he's not allowing anyone else to see the reindeer. Oh, well, presents don't magically appear. Actually, they do magically appear. It's just that Santa Claus uses his magic on the parents to make them believe that they bought the presents. You see, only children can believe in Santa and see the real Santa. Once you become old enough, you can no longer believe in Santa. The magic prevents you from believing in it, and therefore you will believe that you're buying those presents when in fact you're not buying those presents. It's actually Santa delivering those presents. You see, I can construct a scenario that uses Santa Claus's magic to prevent you from disproving Santa Claus. You might say, but there is no evidence. Ah, but absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So you can't disprove Santa Claus because he's magic. The burden is not on you to disprove Santa Claus. The burden is on me to prove Santa Claus. Merely saying that Santa Claus is magic and that explains why we have no evidence of him does not prove that Santa Claus is real. And what about the flying spaghetti monster? Well, you said it's just a construct, but that's the genetic fallacy. Saying that the origin of the flying spaghetti monster is somebody that created it for a trial on intelligent design does not negate the idea that the flying spaghetti monster could be real. In fact, we even saw one in the episode of Futurama, so obviously somebody thinks that the flying spaghetti monster is real. Okay, that's a bit of a stretch, but hey, look, just because the flying spaghetti monster is a created concept doesn't mean that the flying spaghetti monster is not in fact real. Just because I made up something doesn't mean that that something that I made up isn't real. That's the genetic fallacy, to try to say that it's not real by explaining its origin. And that's really the sort of apologetics that theists offer us. They give us some logic. Yes, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And yes, the genetic fallacy is not something that we can use to demonstrate that something isn't true. But the fact that Yahweh comes from a pagan god is evidence against Yahweh. Does it exist in spite of it being from a pagan religion? Maybe. But you still need to prove that, and you haven't done that. The burden is on you, not us. So this is also the fallacy of shifting the burden of proof.
God, if you're willing to actually and genuinely keep an open mind, there are signs of him everywhere, and if you're willing to look in the right places, you'll be amazed at just how real and evident he is.
Okay, so we have the fallacy of special pleading and the fallacy of special knowledge. There's evidence everywhere! Where? I don't see it. Oh, you have to look in the right places. Where? I don't see it. No, you have to look in a certain way. How do you know that? I just know it. Yeah. What you're actually doing beyond the logical fallacies is invoking pattern seeking, which we humans do remarkably well. Looking for a pattern and then calling that pattern God is not actually finding God.
The burden is on religious people to prove that there is a God.
That burden is on atheists. My burden is to let you know about God and his love for you.
Oh, we're back at this clip again. So no, the burden is not on us. The burden is on you, shifting the burden of proof again. And then, circular reasoning. You believe that your burden is to tell us that God loves us. You believe that because that's what your holy book says. Why do you think that your holy book is true? Why should I think that your holy book is true? No reason given, it's just you believe it, I guess. But so what? You can tell me that God loves me or hates me or feels anything you want, but unless and until you prove that there is a God to feel anything or that God has feelings, so you have to do two things. Establish that God exists, and then establish that God has feelings, and then establish that God has feelings for me. So unless and until you do those things, I get to be skeptical of these conclusions.
The atheist? Well, if you're 100% sure that there is no God, you're just lying to yourself because that's something that has never been proven. And if you're not sure...
Straw man and irrelevancy. Irrelevant because you can't prove a negative. Straw man because nobody would make the claim that they have certainty because you can't make that claim because you can't prove a negative.
But if there is a God, that means you were wrong. At which point your only hope becomes that the major religions are all wrong about non-believers being sent to a not very pleasant place after we die. You see what I'm saying? Being atheist is very risky in that sense, especially if you don't know with a certainty that there is no God. And I ask again, how can you be sure?
Pascal's wager? Really? Pascal's wager. Okay, and by major religions, I assume you mean the three monotheistic religions, although you're apparently excluding the two other major religions, Hinduism and Buddhism/Shintoism. But yeah, let's just ignore those Eastern ones and focus on those three. So, Judaism. If Judaism is true, I am fine. Non-belief in God doesn't matter in Judaism. If Christianity is true, then I'm screwed. Okay. But if Islamic religion is true, then you are as screwed as I am. Which means that you better be awfully sure that Allah isn't real, or else you're gonna get punished. Ooh. So, if this is true, if I should prove that your God isn't true, that I should be certain that that's the case, then you should produce an argument or proof against Allah being real, or else you could be wrong. And if you're wrong, then Allah will eat you or do something horrible. I don't know what it is, but it's really bad. Ooh, scary. Are you scared even just a moment that Allah could be real? No, of course not. Are you worried that you might be wrong about Allah? No. Are you so sure that you're right about your God? Well, have you investigated and proven that Allah isn't real? If you haven't, then I don't need to prove that your God isn't real. So you do that, you give me proof that Allah isn't real, and then I'll give you proof that Yahweh isn't real, which actually would wipe out all three religions anyways, making it something I don't have to worry about. But this also excludes non-major religions that make the claim that if you don't believe them, that you're screwed. That could be a problem. In fact, if we're going to use Pascal's wager, even being a Christian isn't guaranteed that you're saved. Because, you see, some Pentecostals believe that you have to speak in the tongues, and if you don't, then you don't have the Holy Spirit, and if you don't have the Holy Spirit, then you can't get into heaven. Some Church of Christ believers believe that you have to be fully immersed in baptism and know that you have to be fully immersed in baptism, or your baptism didn't count, and unless you get baptized, you're not saved and you're not going to heaven. So if the Pentecostals that believe that are right, or if the Church of Christ people believe that are right, you are still screwed even though you're a Christian. Ooh, what are we going to do now? We better prove that the Pentecostals that believe that are wrong, and we better prove that the Church of Christ people that believe that are wrong as well. So I'll tell you what. You go ahead and prove that Allah doesn't exist, and the Church of Christ people are wrong, and that the Pentecostal people are wrong. And you do all of that, and then we can talk about whether or not I need to prove that God isn't real in order to not be worried that I'm going to suffer some horrible fate.
Are you willing to not even consider the possibility of the existence of a God just because some people think it's dumb to believe in God?
Am I willing to not consider the possibility of God just because people think it's dumb? I don't even know how to answer that question. It's so malformed. Is it an irrelevant question? Yeah, it's kind of an irrelevant question, so I don't really need to answer it. But I'll answer it anyways because I don't know lobsters, I guess. Okay, so if people think that believing in God is dumb, that doesn't make me closed off to the idea that God could exist, because it's irrelevant to the proposition. It doesn't matter what people think or feel about any proposition. It doesn't matter if people think that if you believe in proposition X, that you are the smartest, best person in the world. That doesn't mean that proposition X is true. It just means that people have a certain feeling about it. Whatever people think or feel about something is irrelevant to if that something is true or false. Also, it doesn't matter if the group that believes it is doing all sorts of horrible things. That doesn't mean that their belief is false. We can't falsify ideas just because people are being stupid or doing bad things based on that idea. The idea could still be true. Doesn't matter if people think that the idea is false or untrue or stupid or smart. Doesn't matter. The idea must be examined for its own merits. So, we ask about that idea. What evidence do we have to support it? Are there any tests that we could run on it? Is there a logical argument for it? And if we say no to all of those things, then that idea is something that we cannot think is true. We have to be in doubt of that idea. And in this case, that idea would be God. Not because some people think it's dumb, but because there is no positive reason to think that it is true.
I'd personally rather be perceived as dumb my whole life than risk my afterlife.
And again, an appeal to fear, an ad ballum. It's an appeal to the stick. If I am holding a gun at you, and I say drop to your knees and say walla walla bing bang, you're probably going to drop to your knees and say walla walla bing bang. Not because it makes sense to do that, but because you don't want to die. And if I say drop to your knees and call me God, you may or may not do that. You might decide that your belief in your particular God is more important than your life. So you might be willing to sacrifice your life rather than to say that I am God. But no matter what the thing is that I'm telling you to do while I'm holding the gun at you it is not logically valid. The appeal to the fear, the appeal to the threat, doesn't make me right. It doesn't make my conclusion valid. And if there is a God and the best that it can do is hold a cosmic gun to the human race's heads and say, believe in me or else, then that God is not a very good God. That is a God that is willing to use a logical fallacy to get people to believe in it, when it could produce ample amounts of evidence for us so that we would believe in it, and we wouldn't need any threat. We wouldn't need anything because we would have the proof. So this God doesn't really impress me. This God is one of logical fallacies, and as such, I don't think that it is God, because a God would be better than that. Now, that's an assumption that I'm making, but I think that God, if it does exist, wouldn't use logical fallacies. I could be wrong. Maybe God does exist and is willing to use logical fallacies and does use logical fallacies. But you still haven't proven that that's true, so I'm skeptical that that's the case.
You're willing to bet on the fact that everything around you is a result of randomness and no involvement of an intelligent being. That's on you. But
this has to be a tremendous straw man, because I'm not even sure what he's referring to. All this by chance. Do you mean like everything, or do you mean life? Because depending on what you mean, you're either doing bad science or an outright lie or something. I don't know. But if you mean the way everything is, by everything I mean the universe, like solar systems forming and all that, those things happened because the universe is such where those things are able to happen. Is it pure coincidence or chance that it is that way? It might be. It might be that there is no chance involved, because the way that the universe operates is such that these things were inevitable. We, and by we I mean the scientific community, we humans, do not know which way it is, or if either of those is the actual fact. There might be a third possibility that we're not aware of. We just don't know. But that doesn't mean anything. Because we don't know doesn't mean therefore God. And as far as betting on it, I don't have to make any bet at all, because that's where science is going. Remember before you said that I'm not going where science is? Well, that's wrong. I am going exactly where science is leading. And science is saying, we don't know for a lot of these questions, but here's how things work, and we do know about that.
but it just doesn't make sense to me. Because even something as simple as this, you wouldn't believe that it just fell into place looking this way. It looks like someone built it.
Appeal to personal incredulity and a false analogy. It doesn't matter if you don't understand it, and I don't know that I could explain it to you, but this appeal to this false analogy that you just produced suggests to me that you do not understand science. You don't understand either biology or cosmology or both. And depending on what you're referring to would change what I would refer you to go learn about. But in either case, neither of them appears to have the sort of design that you are talking about. There are appearances of design that are not designed. And the design is by nature. That is to say that the appearance of design is due to the way that nature operates. But we can't say that nature designed it, because nature is not a cognitive thing that can design things. Nature itself is not responsible for how nature is. Why is nature that way is a question that science is, again, trying to get the answer to. But to just say, well, it appears designed, so it must be designed, is to ignore the science. And then if you're going to say complexivity equals creation or a creator, then God itself would have to be created by something else, because God is complex. You can't have it both ways. So the only method that works is to go with the scientific method. To admit that life and the universe is something that has an order to it of some sort, and is something that has fallen into certain parameters that allowed for life to develop in this way. But that doesn't mean anything more than that's the way it is. It doesn't mean that there was an intelligence behind it unless and until we find evidence for that intelligence, and we don't have evidence of that yet. Not to mention, of course, that the human body and the universe are designed, if we're going to use that word, very poorly. They could have been built a lot better. So that would pose an additional problem for positing a creator, because you'd have to posit a creator that was an incompetent creator.
How much more complex is a leaf?
Okay, so now I know that you don't understand biology, so go learn biology and come back when you've learned it, because your appeal to the analogy of the house is not how biology works, and a leaf is complex, but we also understand how a leaf came to be through biological evolution. So go learn how that works, and then come back once you know how that works, and then you'll realize what a big, giant mistake you made by trying to compare a leaf with your house.
DNA, reproduction, look at some freaking snowflakes close up.
No!
Snowflakes. Okay, so here's a different theist talking about snowflakes.
Another person said, well, a snowflake is highly ordered. Are you suggesting that somebody's designing? Remember what I said though, it's not enough that they be improbable, and it's not enough that they be highly ordered either. They need to be highly ordered with a specific goal in mind.
See, even this theist says that snowflakes are not design. They're not proof of God. Now, he says that they need to have some sort of purpose to them. But see, his argument at least used some science. It was wrong, but he did a little bit better than you're doing. He was still wrong, but he knew that snowflakes weren't evidence of God, yet you don't. So what happened? I mean, how did he figure that out, but you didn't? I know that's not a question you can answer, but I'm just saying, what's going on? I don't even know. Do lobsters exist anymore or not? I'm not even sure at this point. Moving on to the next fallacy.
It has taken the smartest minds in the world to make things that mimic life, and we're nowhere near reaching that level of complexity, and yet you're willing to believe that life just happened?
You're free to do so, it's your life.
An irrelevancy and a straw man. So it is irrelevant whether or not scientists can create life in the laboratory. Doesn't matter, doesn't mean anything. And then the straw man to say that we believe that it's all by chance. No, that's not how biological evolution works. Once again, I would implore you to go learn how biological evolution works. And then after you've done that, come back and see how wrong you were.
Just doesn't make sense to me.
I know, but that's an appeal to personal incredulity. It doesn't matter that it doesn't make sense to you. Maybe if you, learned some science, then it would make sense to you. Just an idea.
I love you, and it is because I believe that there is a God who came to die for us as Jesus Christ. Why I want to tell you this, so that you will be as happy as I will be when we die.
Okay, so due to your circular reasoning, you want to tell me that something loves me that I don't believe that exists. That's nice. As far as me being happy or unhappy when I die, it's pretty much irrelevant to me. I don't get to know how I'm going to feel at that point, and it really doesn't matter because my emotions are irrelevant. What matters to me is the truth, not how I feel about that truth, not how I feel as a person, but whether or not I'm holding as much truth as I can in my brain before I perish. That's what matters to me, and that might make me happy. It might not make me happy, but as long as it's the truth, that's what matters most to me. I once was a Christian, and I, too, wanted people to feel what I felt. So I know what that's like. But you're going about it all wrong, because the number of logical fallacies that you have will never get anyone to the point that you want them to be at. So, I guess what I'm saying is, unless and until we have a logically coherent argument from you, we must continue to be skeptical of your conclusions. And because you also have a Spanish channel, here again is that same message, but in Spanish. Si no tenemos argumento logical, continuamos a ser skeptical de tu argumento.